Good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're happy to see you here at the Ford Foundation. And we are here for a very special occasion, another Ideas at Ford. And because we are on video and are going to be accessible as much as we can, I will describe myself for the visually impaired. I am a black man wearing clear glasses. I have a bald head. I'm wearing a tan sweater and khakis, and I am sitting here in the room that is the Susan Beresford room at the Ford Foundation, and welcoming you and welcoming the amazing Joy T. Tatum, who is the author of this book, Sisters of Makama. And this book is, I said, as we were discussing earlier, this is a beautiful book that is almost fiction. I mean, in the sense of the way in which it's
Yeah, I love to hear
written,
that.
the way it's written, and the way in which the characters are treated, but also the way in which the environment, the context, the atmospherics, the optics are represented are so beautiful. But it's not fiction. It's the
It's
story
nonfiction.
of an amazing young woman who, at 15, left Kerala to go to the farthest reaches of rural India, and a group of sisters from Kentucky who dedicated themselves to building this hospital and community. And that's what this book is about.
It is. And well, first I just want to thank you, Darren, for inviting me here. And we were just talking earlier about the connection. I remember when I was doing the research for this book, seeing in the archives there was a sort of like a mission. They called it the missions log. Like they would say what happened every day, and they noted like the day that the people from the Ford Foundation came to the same area because, I mean, I feel such a connection to the work that Ford does because they were right there in the middle of all of what was going on in India at the time. But the story ultimately, it is a story of these women, and as a writer, it's always a writer of nonfiction. That's sort of like the greatest compliment you can pay us is to say it reads like a novel. But I truly feel like I just told this one story, but there were so many. I mean, almost everybody I encountered in the research of this book, it just convinced me that there's so many of us who have these stories. I mean, the work that these women were doing, especially women of that generation, just the choice to leave the place that you're from and go somewhere else to follow your ambition, there is always an amazing story there. So really all I had to do was follow that wherever it led me.
But it's true. I mean, we all have stories, but we can't write. We all have stories, but we can't do this. And so let's talk about putting this story, what was your mother's lived experience. It is important to situate her because I know, and I think your treatment of your mother is so beautiful. It's not romanticized and full of sentimentality that way.
You've met my mother. She would not be okay with that. She's not a sentimental person.
Well, I mean, but she's clearly, you capture her courage because she was 15 years old.
I know. I still can't get my head around it. I mean, younger than like my older daughter is now, and the thought of her just getting on a train to go halfway around the country, halfway across the country is let alone to a place where she doesn't speak the language, she doesn't know what she's going to find. To study with a group of American women, she had for sure never met a white person before then. Some of her classmates had never seen a train before they got on that train to, go 1,000 miles away. I mean, and even now, when I talk to her about this book, she's proud that the story is out there, and it's gratifying in a certain way. But the thing she still says to me is, is this really a book? I mean, this is just my life. This is just what I did. Like, why is this so significant? But what I always come back to is, in some ways, I feel like you can never really know the significance of the choices that you make. I mean, all of our individual choices in some small way shape the history of the world around us. I mean, we've all lived through these last 2.5 years. We're all just sort of trying to get through our own lives, and yet we've been through this, really horrible event. And that's what history is. That's what shapes the future of any country, any community, any institution also.
But it feels like you're telling a sort of a retelling the first 2 decades of Indian independence through the eyes, the lens of a group of your mother and a group of white nuns from Kentucky. And it's fascinating because you deal with the issues of caste, religious discrimination, the rural, urban, obviously the British, the legacy of colonialism. All of it is very present in this book. As you think about when you were putting this book together, did you think about like the narrative arc of Indian history, modern Indian history?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Darren, because it is something that I thought about so much as I was writing and also doing the research. In some ways, especially as a writer of nonfiction, I do have to stick to the facts as I can find them out, but also when you're writing about history, the historical record that's available to me. So, for Indian history, as is the case for so much history around the world, what's recorded leaves out a lot of people, frankly. So I had, it was an incredible treasure, like the archives of the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth. They opened the order's archives to me. That was something they had never done before. I had, hundreds of letters that these women wrote home to their families over the course of many years, describing day by day exactly what happened. But again, that was the story from their point of view, from the point of view of the American women who went there, their perceptions of what was happening in India, which were incredibly rich and detailed and complex in many ways. But, I really felt that obligation to look for who was not in that record, whose letters did not survive, like who doesn't appear often in the written record. So that's where, I really had to think about, I had to find people, interview them, and let the Indian women, as many as I could find, tell their story as well. And that was, for me, some of the most compelling narrative pieces, because I wanted to capture that encounter. It wasn't just women from Kentucky suddenly arriving in India. That was definitely part of it, and it was a new and strange place for them. But that moment when women like my mother, when they would reach this place and they had their own ambitions and, sense of adventure and wanting to leave home and do what they could do, and then realizing, oh, these women are like no one I've ever seen before. They're speaking a language I don't completely understand. They're asking me to do things that I are foreign to me, and then allowing them to sort of drive the narrative and showing how they also shaped the history of the institution and how the institution was willing to be shaped by them. I mean, that to me was some of the most important work I was trying to do in this book.
And so talk about some of the vignettes that are in the book that when you maybe got the galley and you read it again, that surprised you or made you think twice or maybe made you think, I'm not sure I should have included this.
Well, I think it was more that I mean, there were certain parts of again that conflict, I think, between these young Indian women and the American women whom they worked with, that I knew I wanted in the book because, again, they conveyed some of that tension and the complexity of being an American institution working in India at that time. But I really had no idea how it would be perceived by, some of these women are still living. I mean, right. The women from this religious order, the nurses who were there. I mean, I knew I had to keep it in there, but I didn't know how comfortable they would be. So when the book came out earlier this year, I had a chance to go. The order hosted an event, something like this, and I spoke to so many of these nuns. I mean, the original 6 are no longer alive, but there were many women there who are now in their 80s who were there in those early years, have very vivid memories. Some I had interviewed. And it was so interesting because, what they told me is they were really glad that someone had written about that, because for them as insiders to that institution, it was hard for them to be able to sort of say in public what had really happened. But but it was a necessary change that they went through. And even now, I mean, the institution itself is run by Indian women, but there's that sense of they know that they have to continue changing. I mean, you talk about the complexities of caste and religion and community. I mean, my mother is from a small village in the south of India, but in some ways her family was privileged. I mean, they were, I won't spoil the whole story for you, but they were from a landowning family, right, for
which
sure,
was an
which
upper
is a
caste.
big difference.
Yes.
But now, and her community, which was many of them now are the leadership of the order, yes, but they are themselves now being sort of challenged and asked to change by women from indigenous communities, yes, in India who are now entering the order and stepping into leadership roles. So I think even an institution that started as an American institution, adapted to become an Indian institution, has to continue to change in order to survive.
Right. I mean, that evolution, you write a lot about, obviously, the Nazareth Hospital, but also the order, mm-hmm, and the evolution of both of those institutions. And again, the arc of social transformation in India, which is very a through line, that's clear. We've been talking about the women, but your father is also a part of this. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was the other thing that was also interesting. I mean, men of your father's background, I mean, he too was from a small place, and he too left and did
That's
something
right.
radical and did not do what many, mm-hmm, Indian men did when they left to go to the city or mm-hmm, to go back to the village and find a wife. Mm-hmm. He didn't do that.
No, he didn't. He did not.
By a long shot, he didn't do that.
Yeah, and I don't want to. It's true, and my father's a very sweet and gentle man. He's very shy to talk about the love affair and the love. I'm not going to go into
No,
all
but it's
that,
really sweet the way, I mean, the way you, you represent, that they fell in love. And it
right,
was, I
right.
mean, but that it was a radical thing to
It
not,
was.
it
It
was
really
very
was.
radical not to, for the way they got together was absolutely radical in the context of
Of
early
India at that
1960
time.
India.
That's right. That's right. And again, like my parents would never call themselves radical. Like so many of the people in this book were doing, what I would consider making radical choices for their time. They really were just stepping so far outside the social norms of the communities that they grew up in. But that's the way, countries change, communities change by people. In some ways, it is by individuals making those choices. And I'm glad also that you brought up. I mean, my father's a sort of he's not really a character in the action of the book, but there are other men who certainly. I mean, there's the first doctor at the hospital was a man, and I was so curious. I think. I'm always so interested in people's personal stories, like how did they get to where they are? I mean, I think that's why I became a journalist. But as I started to talk to so many of the people who are in the book, like how did you decide to leave home? Why did you study nursing? Why did you go there? Why did you go to this place and not that place? You know what I found over and over again, and this is true for my parents and so many of the characters, the people who pass through this unusual institution, over and over again, they were motherless and or fatherless children. Like people who had gone through that early loss, like either an absent parent, something had happened. And I think you can't really discount that. And particularly in a period, this period like after World War II, after partition, there was so much dislocation, so much trauma of different kinds. And I think, for those of us who study history, study economics, study social change, there's a tendency to look only at those, the really, the sort of top level, the broad trends. But, a question that really fascinated me is how those personal experiences also shape why people do the things they do. Why this person leaves the village and and looks for an opportunity somewhere else, and why this person stays. And I'm convinced. I really started to feel that it wasn't just a coincidence. That something about that loss also drives people forward.
Right. I mean, it is that loss, or it may be an intense and profound presence. I mean, when you and I both know Indra Nooyi, and when Indra talks about leaving India to come to America, part of it was because of and why she studied math, which young girls didn't do, because of her father, and the complexity of that relationship. On the one hand, the cultural pull to be a normal Indian girl from a nice family, which meant, at a young age to find a nice, Indian boy to marry,
Right, right.
as opposed to coming to America and going to Yale. But both she and her sister did that in part but their father was also, there was a yin and yang, right? Where he was on the one hand saying, you should be a good Indian girl, and then on the other hand saying you're good at math, and maybe you should, right? And so
Right.
so it's like you either don't have that, and you truly are longing for something and are looking for something, or you've got somebody at home really pushing you.
Yeah. Yeah, both absolutely can be true. But it's so interesting. I mean, I followed Indra's career over the years, and it is so interesting that, people, I've become convinced that once you leave your village, you never stop leaving. You keep, like, once you've made that first big leap, you keep going. You want to then look for the next thing. And I mean, I know for my parents and so many of the women in this story, it's like once they had left home,
Right.
gone from Kerala to Bihar, why not then go from Bihar to Delhi or Bombay? And then once you've done that, why not go to New York? Why not then
So
go
it's like
to
this ambition
something
sort of is
drives
unlocked.
them. Yes,
I
yes.
mean, I certainly can, leaving, Goose Creek, Texas, yeah, you get things get unlocked, and then yeah, that's very true. Now, when you think about today, so your mother, your father, and then you go back to India you go as an adult, and you're the bureau head. I mean, Time Magazine. You're a big deal journalist in India. What was how was it to think, because you hadn't done the book yet? I mean, how was it to go and live through the kind of narrative of your parents, and did you have a strong connection to India, to Kerala, to any part? Obviously not by here, but in the South, growing up. I mean, often immigrant families really lose ties with their home communities. How was your?
So I definitely did have a connection to Delhi and to Kerala. I mean, my parents, both of them, are from Kerala in the south, and we had visited there many times. And then we have a lot of family in Delhi also. That's where my parents met, where I was born, and I still have many relatives there. But Bihar and the rest of India, no. I think for so many immigrants to the United States, like my idea of India was only the India that my parents had experienced, and that's what they would convey to me. And I think that's part of the reason why the stories that I had heard about, when you're young, you ask like, well, how did we come to this country? Like how, what's the story? I sort of took it for granted that, what my mother said, well, I went to study nursing. I went to Bihar. My teachers were nuns from Kentucky, and I learned how to be a nurse. And then I came to the United States and we lived happily ever after. Like that was sort of, they were very strict, but that was sort of it. So I think when you're growing up, you just sort of hear your family stories and that's all you know. You don't really fully appreciate how commonplace or how unusual they might be. It was really only when I was a journalist and went to Bihar, and I mean, really, Bihar is one of those places. Pretty much every organization that works in international development has been to Bihar at some point, because the challenges are so great. Yeah. And so I had been there, of course, as a journalist. It was an interesting time to be there, and going there and then realizing this is where my mother had come. Like this is where all that happened. This is where these American women had come, and not even to the one big city in Bihar, but like a very small town with a lot of challenges that even now is almost like a byword for sort of like political political corruption. So then I really wanted to understand, how did they get here? How did they just navigate the incredibly complex political and economic challenges of that time, and then continue through so many decades. So you really have to sort of be there to understand how difficult it really was.
All right, I'm told that the Q&A sign just went up there. Okay, all right. Questions from our audience for GOT? Yes, please, Mr. Goodman. Let us go to the microphone, please. And it's right there. Do you see the microphones? And we will.
Thank you for doing these, Darren. I learn a lot from them. This is my first in person, and the virtual has been terrific as well. Thank you.
We're happy to have you in person here. It's much better seeing you in person, Alan.
Yeah, I'm taller in person. I don't quite know how to ask the question properly, but in an age where we're so concerned with soft power, hard power, the influence of America abroad, and faith and good works mix in that, were you able to understand whether America had a different image because of what the sisters did, because of what they did with your mother, building the hospital, or that effort didn't translate into a better image for America, a liking for America, an understanding of America? Because we certainly don't understand India.
It's such a great question. I think that the easy narrative. I mean, because clearly right now, that sense of like, oh, the rest of the world is sort of wary of what America might do overseas. Like that is very strong. So there's an impulse to imagine that, oh, in that immediate post-war period, things must have been like people must have been more receptive, or America, at that time was somehow less complicated, or that people were more open to that idea. But honestly, those issues were so present even at that time.
Which I was so.
Yeah.
I mean, you really.
Yeah.
I, of course, and not to, but I want you to talk about this because in the lore of the Ford Foundation narrative, it was, oh, we were loved in India. The American institutions were beloved. We had. Whenever we wanted, the president would say, "Come, have lunch," and the representative was treated like this colonial whatever. I mean, and what you make clear is like there was a lot of tension with the kind of American hegemony and China too. But I mean, really, this book you really put into context.
It was absolutely, and again, I had to sort of let go of my own preconceptions of what that period was like. But again, like India was a big and important power in World War II. It had just, had gone through World War II. It was key to the British war effort. America was, again, like, yes, there was a certain sense of America having a capacity and a willingness to go into the rest of the world that certainly Britain and the rest of Europe did not. Like they were in retreat, absolutely. But, Indians were very aware of like the geopolitical context of that time, and the tensions that we're aware of now were present there. And it was a constant negotiation for every American institution that was attempting to do work there. It didn't mean that either individuals or institutions in India were completely hostile. The point is, like, these women found ways that they could be useful. They found people who really wanted to work with them, but they also just never lost sight of the fact that they were operating in a political context, that they were there and there were people in power who they had to work with, but were suspicious of them because this is a new power center in this town, right? There were the people whom they were, helping or serving, however you want to put it, who again sort of welcomed this new power center that was going to sort of shake things up and challenge the existing power structure. But that didn't mean that they were going to be simply sort of passive participants in all of this either. It was very complicated. And what really came through in the letters and the records of the women who were working in that time is that they were fully aware of that context even from the very beginning, and it was something that they had to carefully navigate at every step of the way. I mean, that absolutely doesn't change. But also that sense of like, is what you are doing actually useful and sustainable for the community that you're doing it in? I mean, and if you don't ask yourself that question, then all the rest of it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the most interesting in this vein, one of the most interesting vignettes was the lawsuit for the very high caste Indian family whose child dies at the hospital, and
it really all it all came to a head, I think, with that this one particular incident. And you know what's so interesting? I act like, again, for those of you, I see Manu there. Like, I know there are some of you here who have been to places like this. Some people don't leave these, So I was able to find like some of the people who are actually involved in this like very dramatic confrontation between the landowners of the town and the American women. And in some ways, like that incident is still like a very sort of sensitive topic. Like they've moved past it. But even now, people don't really like to talk about it. Even now, there's a sort of wary acceptance of like, well, you are running this hospital. It's good that you're doing that because, no one else is willing to serve the poorest of the poor in that particular community. And the sisters also, like, they know that they need to work with these people, but there's a certain wariness that doesn't go away. So I felt that it was really important to sort of show that like this it does happen.
Yeah, no, it's a very powerful, I think, constellation of just things that come together in this one scene that is really powerful. At least for me, one of the most in the book. Other questions? So we're going to close, but I want to ask you, now you are writing for the New York Times. You have a perspective as a journalist. You look at the context in India, and things have changed significantly. What's your assessment today of India, Modi's India, the context, not to get political, but to actually, though, to Alan's point about, diplomatic relations are challenged, and the geopolitical context in the region and what we've just seen in the last year with respect to Russia and India's seemingly initial neutrality at best. How do you assess things?
So I think there are a couple of ways that I think about it. One is, again, that sense of India having a very clear, a very strong sense of its role in the international order. Like that has been present from, the moment of independence. So the position that India is taking right now, kind of wanting to work with the United States, but not keeping its independence is not exactly the right word, but like keeping its, following its own strategic path for sure. That doesn't surprise me at all. I do think the next few years, China is changing, the United States is changing, India is changing. How that constellation is going to shift, I think, is something to watch very, very closely over the next few years. But I think the political context in India that I really like, I'm sort of waiting to see what unfolds is it's really the way that Indians right now are starting to think of their own national story, like who is included in their sense of what it means to be an Indian. We're going through that. We have been going through that in America for our entire history, really. But, even for myself, someone who was born in India and has been studying India as a journalist for a long time, I was struck by, just the reality of life, even in a small town in India in the 1950s and 60s. It was I mean, not quite cosmopolitan, but there were people from all over the world, and that was normal. There were, different communities, like that was the fabric of life, and there wasn't that assumption that, you know, that religious minorities like don't have a sort of full place in India or as Indians, like that attempt to sort of define India according to the norms of one community. I mean, that is something that has just really, really accelerated. And so, I mean, I hope that, for people who in India who are reading this book, if I can do anything, it's just to sort of offer a portrait of this part of the country at a time when those assumptions didn't necessarily hold. So that's, yeah, I'm really, again, like as someone, my family is from, a Christian community, and it's one of the oldest in the world. I mean, Christians, Muslims, like all these different communities have been there for such a long time. It's absurd to me to think that they're not Indian, but that's, yeah, I think that process of a nation defining itself is really fraught, and I'll be watching to see what happens.
Well, we will be watching and we'll be reading your wonderful book. Thank you so much, Jyoti. This is a
Thank you,
great,
Darren.
great book, and we are pleased that we have copies for everyone outside and drinks as well. So we hope you will stay around and congratulate the author. Thank you.
Thanks so much.